Thanks, Christina. That's great. Thanks for doing that. Well, just a big warm welcome to everybody who's joined the session today. It's great to see such interest in the work that's going on in this programme. I'm going to shortly hand over to my colleague Sarah Davis, who will give an intro to what we'll be talking about today. But just to a very quick recap on what Christina sort of talked through in terms of the tools that we're going to be using. If you want to ask a question as we're sort of going through and talking, probably the best thing to do is to do that in the chat box and just prefix that with a Q, and we can pick that up when we have sort of natural question pauses. If you want to ask a question in the mic when we prompt you to do so, if you could raise your hand, which is the little hand icon in the participant window, and we'll take those in order as they come through. I think that's just about it, really. But if you do have any questions as we go along, do ask questions in the chat box, and we'll address those as we go through. But I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Sarah Davis, who will talk you through what we'll be discussing today. Over to you, Sarah.
Hi, thanks very much, Marianne. And I'm very excited to be broadcasting to the nation with these lovely headphones on, as I'm sure everyone can imagine. Thanks very much for joining us. This is the outline of what we're going to be covering today. So I'll be doing a quick introduction, and then we'll move on to 3 of the projects in the Developing Digital Literacies programme, talking about their work. There'll be a quick time for questions after each of their inputs, and we're leaving around 15 minutes for discussion at the end. So we'll be very keen to take questions and comments from you at that stage. I'll just whiz back to that slide, that we had up as everyone was joining the session and saying thank you very much to everyone who's filled that in, and well done, because my circle is actually one of the worst. It is very hard to draw circles in that thing. Very interesting to see that everyone seems to be pretty much on the high intensity side of feeling rather than low intensity, and there's a lot of crosses there for representing your own more positive feelings, and a lot of suggestion that you're worried, at least, that the staff you work with are feeling more concerned, angry or fearful about the technology. And I think that is a common pattern that we're seeing when we're talking to people about that. There's a lot of concern about the way that other groups of staff feel about the use of technology in their work, and maybe the pressures to use it. And it's a question of how you help them see where it is relevant, or overcome their fears. So just go back to where we were. For those of you who missed our first webinar last month, I'll just do a quick recap on some of our key points about digital literacies. So the definition we're using of digital literacies is those capabilities which fit an individual for living, learning and working in a digital society. Now that's a very broad definition. And that's because I think how exactly digital literacy works depends on your context. It will look different in some groups of learners and staff in an FE college from how it will look with different groups within a university. It will also look different in the different disciplines, and that's something I'll mention again a bit later on. But we have pulled out a number of key aspects of digital literacies that doesn't have to be taken as rote, but it's just to get people thinking about some of the things that make up digital literacies. Now, ICT literacy is there, but it's by no means all of it, and I think that's in some ways the key point here, that it's a very holistic concept, digital literacy. So we are, as well as being able to use the technology, it's very much about being able to use it critically, making appropriate decisions in your educational context about how to use it, and that it's not just about digital skills. Those of you who are at the last webinar may remember this development model that Helen presented. And I just wanted to put it up here again because obviously it's as relevant for developing staff digital literacies as it is for developing student ones. And sort of just thinking about these, the access and awareness and skills at perhaps the lower end of the pyramid, that's not the end of the story, but they're a really important prerequisite for developing some of the practices, the situated practices, the practices in context, and the starting to feel like it's part of you and part of your professional practice to make appropriate use in technologies in certain ways. But the people don't just move up the pyramid, if you like. It's the pressures from the top downwards are also really important. So things about people's attitudes and their needs and their motivation are really important drivers or brakes in developing the skills and seeking out sorts of staff development and training. So it's a matter of thinking about both what the motivations are and the needs for staff, as well as making sure that appropriate provision is in place so that they have access to the technology, awareness of what they might need to do, and means of developing their skills. So before we go further, I wonder if you could use the voting buttons that Christina demonstrated earlier, just above the list of participants, to select which of these groups best describes your own role, and if it's one of the others, use the chat box to give a detail, and I'll just give you a minute or so to do that. So that's brilliant. Thank you everybody for voting. And yes, that's how it looked from the sign-up sheet, that we're predominantly an audience with already an interest in e-learning or technology, enhanced learning as part of their role, but also a lot of staff and educational developers and a lot of others. I'm just having a look in learning support, careers. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that what we'll cover will meet the needs of a lot of those groups. As part of the programme, we've been working with a range of professional organisations. I'm not going to read through those, but that's just to give you a feel for the kind of organisations that we're working with, in addition to institutional projects. And these organisations underneath the projects carried out a baseline study of digital literacies amongst their membership, and mostly found, not across the board, but in most cases, the digital skills development amongst those groups was reported as being largely either self-driven or driven by peers. It wasn't so much to do with following particular programs or picking up on a specific pathway. It was more to do with things that individuals felt were useful, found a need for, searched for either training, but often just did it hands-on themselves or followed from colleagues who had recommended something to them. So when we look at some of the barriers and enablers for staff digital literacy development, that one of the key barriers that was reported in those professional association reports, but also from the projects, is staff just not knowing where to start, not knowing really which technologies or area of technologies to start with, but also who to ask. If they didn't have a handy colleague who was a good source of information, they weren't sure who to get started with, because sometimes they were nervous of approaching other people who were perceived as experts for not wanting to waste their time or to seem silly. Everyone's time was obviously a big issue. Making time for this sort of personal and professional development can obviously get squeezed in a life full of many other deadlines. And there was a fear of the pace of change, fear that if you put the effort into learning something, then it's going to change, you're going to have to learn something else. Fear of additional expectations of you in your role if people see that you're doing stuff online. Fear that students will expect you to respond 24/7 just because you can. Fear, and a lot of fear generally actually of student expectations and students' very high perceived levels of digital literacy sometimes amongst staff, and not a perception that is necessarily very accurate. And some of the enablers that the projects in the programme we've been working on, something I've grouped under quick wins, which has been things like grouping together all the staff development opportunities from wherever they're from within the institution that are something to do with technology or technology to enhance your work, and presenting them together in some easy format or like an online calendar or something that staff can choose from. So it's not terribly complicated, but just bringing things together and making it easier for people to access. Generally, I think working perhaps e-learning departments working more closely with staff development, if they don't do already, was something that also was a bit of a quick win. A lot of projects have been meeting the need for staff to recognise other staff like them doing technology-enhanced things, such as, I think Reading identified what they were calling digital heroes. A lot of the other projects have done case studies or mini projects, or I know Plymouth have produced talking head videos of their staff talking about how they've embedded technology in their context, and that's something that is a good way of getting over that kind of where to start and also the what's in it for me for staff. Projects have been working with a number of staff groups, and we'll hear more about that from the projects we're going to talk. And generally linking in with existing CPD, continuing professional development efforts and pathways, including annual performance reviews, is something that's worked well, and I think Neil will be saying a bit more about that later. As I just mentioned before, staff recognising this in their context is really important, and something that the project at Bath has spent a lot of time on, and other projects too, is talking about digital literacies in the discipline. What does this mean for your discipline? Because it does differ, and Bath have produced faculty-specific digital literacy statements that to sort of represent this agreement around a set of key skills and practices in those disciplines. Oops, trying to. Look at the time. I think I'll have to come back to this later, actually, talking about embedding technology into staff development, because I need to make time for the projects to start now. But that's something that if people are interested, do ask, and I'll just give a quick update on that work as part of the discussion session at the end. So I'd like to move on to Janet from Cardiff, talking about their work with librarians and careers and employability staff.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully. Okay, I'll assume yes. Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Just want to very briefly talk about one element of the DGDOL project at Cardiff. My colleague Jo Nichols is also in the room, so in terms of the discussion, we'll both be available to answer questions. DGDOL is an institutional change project, so its focus is across the institution, learning and teaching, research, admin, all staff and students, but we're going to focus today on one element, which is how to help service providers to support the development of digital literacies in staff and students and in themselves. We've also done a considerable amount of work on from the top down in terms of strategy. I'm not going to talk about that today, but if anybody's interested in that, then we can pick that up in the questions. So what we've got, what we find that we've got here at Cardiff, and I'm sure it's similar elsewhere, is there's a gap between the academic staff and students whose focus is very much on their discipline, on their tasks and practices in that discipline, in their study or their work, and between service providers who have content, they have tools, they have people, they have processes, they have provision, things that they can support the academics and students, but they're often presented in a kind of menu style approach. So you can come along and you can pick up a course on this or a course on that. And so there's often a gap in terms of application of academic staff and students recognizing the importance of the things that the service providers are offering. And service providers not really understanding the context so well sometimes that these literacies are to be applied in. So what we've been looking at Cardiff is how to develop a sustainable approach to bridging that gap. And we've really been looking at how to facilitate conversation between these two groups. And we talk about that in terms of enablement. We found that the term enablement is much more meaningful, particularly to professional services, that they're enabling other staff and students to do their work more effectively and more appropriately, rather than talking about digital literacies or information literacies or whatever. So just to look at what we've been doing very, very briefly. We're bringing you back to the model, actually, and I'm very pleased that that Sarah's already introduced this framework, so it saves me a bit of time. But we've been using this framework as a way of facilitating and underpinning the facilitation of the conversation between these two groups. It's a framework that we found all of the stakeholders can identify with. So it really helps people to understand what they're trying to achieve in terms of digital learning literacies, information literacies. It helps them to identify and clarify their own roles and responsibilities. So what we found is that when we talk about digital literacies in the context of this framework, that people can identify, yes, well, what I'm really trying to do in this particular course is raise awareness of particular elements, or I'm trying to develop people's skills, or my particular objective is a specific practice within my discipline. So we're able to really help people to talk about it and identify what it is that they want to focus on, and also what they can do about it, what their role is. But what we found as well, that although that helps the conversation and that really helps us to start the discussion, what we were finding, particularly from our subject librarians who we've been working quite substantially with, is that they were also looking for a very practical approach, practical tools that they could use to continue that conversation and to really prompt the discussions that were going on. And they particularly wanted to be able to map between the literacies that we were talking about and the available services and resources and so on that they had out there. They wanted to be able to say to people, well, if this is the literacy that you're interested in developing, then here are some resources that might help you. These are some activities you might want to do with your students, and so on. So they're looking for something quite pragmatic. And so we've been looking spending quite a lot of time looking at how we can develop something that is both faithful to this model and that uses the model, which we found to be very helpful, but that also helps people to identify at the point that they need it the relevant services that they're looking for. And we've been through a long process. I'm not going to go into details of this, and it doesn't matter that it's intentionally so that you can't actually see the details on those the small images, because they're meant to be representative. But we've been through a whole process where we've first of all started by analysing existing information literacy and digital literacy models. So we looked at things like the ANSIL model and the curriculum. We looked at SCONL and the SCONL digital literacy lens. And we looked at about 8 different frameworks for digital and information literacy. And we did a content analysis of those and tried to condense them down to descriptors of the literacies that we were interested in, and then we tried to map those onto the model. So here we were mapping them back onto the Beetham and Sharp model. We've done some iterations with that, working with different groups of staff. That includes subject librarians, it includes careers and employability staff, to really get them to contribute to that process. I can't tell for enough time. And then we've evolved the framework, and we're looking to develop viewpoint-like cards to support the process. And we've got these different groups that we've been working with. So we've been looking at with getting people to take ownership and responsibility. The key here, I need to finish now, but the key here is that we wanted the professional service staff to own the activities that they were doing. We wanted them to be the drivers for them, so that the whole process would be sustainable, because the project finishes in 3 or 4 months' time. We can't be running the workshops. They need to be taking ownership of it, and that's what's been happening. I can talk more about the activities in the questions. So sorry, that's gone very quickly.
Thanks very much, Janet. There's already a question there, actually, from Roger Gardner, I can see. How do the descriptors account for disciplinary difference?
Okay, the descriptors don't, but what we're doing with them in terms of the model would do that. So what we've found is that if you think in terms of the model, I'll just go back to that slide. The academic and disciplinary areas are really at these top 2 levels. So academics really are focusing on practices in a disciplinary context. They're focusing on the attributes they're wanting to develop. And the professional services are generally working at these bottom 3 levels. So what we're doing is within this the process and the cards, the card process for facilitation, we'll be getting them to really identify within their disciplinary context how these things should be applied.
Thanks very much, Janet. That's an interesting way of thinking of it, actually, splitting the pyramid into the bits that are predominantly apply at the disciplinary level and those that are predominantly for services. Were there any other questions?
Is it available yet? Bits of it are. So the thinking around it is we did a presentation as part of the LSE Network Ed series a few weeks ago, and that's available online as a video. And we are putting the process up on the Design Studio. The cards are in, the card set is work in progress, so that's not available yet, but it will be by the end of the program. And strategy-based stuff, all the strategies are available online, and some discussion of them. And we are putting as well together a video of senior staff talking about the way that those strategies have been developed and how that's all happened.
Lovely, thanks very much. And maybe Janet or Joe could pop the link in the chat box in a minute when I hand over to Stephanie. So thank you very much, Janet. And now we're going to move on to Stephanie Anyadi from UCL, talking about her digital department project.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Right, my name is Stephanie, and I'm a teaching administrator and a teaching administrator manager at UCL, and have been involved in the digital department project, which is funded by Jisc and looks at the digital literacy development of teaching administrators. Teaching administrators basically are a group of professional support staff that are based in academic departments and are working in a student-facing way. So they deal with students on a daily basis, they support academic staff, and they also have regular contact with central services like, for example, the registry, career service, the students' union, and so on. They generally have a very wide and varied range of responsibilities, so that could include admissions, examinations. You can see the list there. They also include, it also usually includes VLE support, and at UCL we use Moodle for that. There is not a generally recognized job title for this role, even within one institution. So you could be called anything from teaching administrator, course administrator, course support officer, all kinds of things. And the responsibilities that members of this group have can also be quite varied depending on the number of people available within a department. So if you are a small department and you've got one person in that role, they may have to carry out the whole range of responsibilities. In others, it might be split up in various ways. So it's a quite a slippery group to capture in a way, but we have felt that it's been really beneficial to try and do that. So at UCL, we've got about 200 people in that group, and have been able to develop quite an active community of practice. So we've got an annual teaching administrator conference where about 100 of us come together and listen to presentations and have workshops about good practice. We've got a Moodle forum where people ask questions about any aspect of the job and usually get quite a few responses about good practice and suggestions. And we started to develop a teaching administrator handbook, which will provide information for new members of staff, for example. And all this activity has raised the profile of this staff group. So, for example, we've now got recently established a network of e-learning champions, and which would have been unusual a few years ago, but they include an academic member of staff and a professional support member of staff for every department in this network. And they've also become more involved at faculty level in decisions. And it's been recognized also by our Vice Provost Education, for example, who's been interested in the potential of this group to reach across UCL with any developments. So there has also been an interest in professionalization and an interest in personal professional development across this group. And that's where our project came in. So we wanted to explore ways in which we could raise the self-confidence of members of this group and help them with their personal development. And we thought external accreditation would also give some more recognition and enable us to certify, to make sure that certain standards are met. So, for example, we could include them in job descriptions. And we decided to go with CMOD, which many of you may be aware of, which is the certified membership of the Association for Learning Technology, which is a portfolio-based accreditation, which that is not too onerous on the whole, but requires a certain element of reflection, which is unusual, which many of our teaching administrators are maybe not so used to in their job. and we were quite keen to develop that and encourage that. We developed a cohort-based program of workshops so that rather than people doing their, working on their portfolio on their own, we could help them with the different sections of the portfolio, and at the same time help them to network and to exchange good ideas and good practice. And that's been really, really useful, and they've been really keen on doing that. And for every workshop that we run, we can always hear people saying, oh, I didn't know that, and how do you do that? So that's been really, really beneficial. And we've also set up a network of mentors to help people through the process. And again, that's been really helpful because they can get immediate feedback on any work that they do towards the portfolio. And on the whole, we've seen that talking about the pyramid, that it, in a way, it does help people to move onwards from the kinds of skills-based thinking towards developing a new identity and increasing their self-confidence and their ability to support others. So as a next step, we have been starting to think of how we can possibly build on the CMALT accreditation with even more demanding modules at master's level. But following from the pilot cohort, the second cohort, we have also included people from other staff groups. So we have included lecturers in the second cohort. And that interaction between lecturers and teaching administrators has also been really, really helpful. And so we would definitely want to continue to do that. And we've also started to consider widening it out beyond UCL. So we have included people from the Institute of Education, for example. And so we would just really like to build on that further. And of course, if anybody is interested, we'd be very happy to share and possibly open it up even further. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Sorry, lost my mouse pointer then. Does anyone have any questions for Stephanie? Maybe while you're thinking, I'd be quite interested if people could use the tick and cross buttons, again, where the voting buttons were last time, the polling buttons, to indicate, is this teaching administrator role a role that you recognise at your institution or not? So a tick for yes and a cross for no.
That's quite interesting. Also about the question, Andy's question about the career path. I think what we have seen in the past, maybe 10, 15 years ago, was that people generally slipped into the role maybe because they were studying at the university and then moved into, after their degree, moved into an administrative job in their department. We have seen more and more that people are applying for it in order to go into management in higher education, basically. So that's definitely one way in which people may progress. Others may move from academic departments into central divisions like the registry.
That's great, thank you, Stephanie. There's another question coming here from Helen. Have you seen any impact yet of these new skills attitudes? Difficult to measure, obviously, but do you have a sense of that at all?
Yes, we have actually. We have really seen an increase in self-confidence in some of our colleagues. I think just by working with others and having a certificate to show at the end has enabled some of them, for example, to go towards to ask to be given the e-learning champion role in their department and so contribute even further, which has really been good to see. Tim's question about the group including learning technologies, yes, in fact, because we've got quite a few new learning technologists at UCL, our CMALT cohort did include learning technologists both in the first and in the second cohort that we've had so far. And some of the more experienced ones have also acted as mentors. So we have included those as well, yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much, Stephanie. And now we'll move on to Neil Witt talking about his work at Plymouth.
Hello, can I make sure that you can hear me? Someone can type something in the window to make sure I'm not talking to myself. Oh, that's good. That's good. Thank you for that. I'm 7 minutes to talk about 18 months of work. So I'm only going to select one area of our project, which is the CPOD project. So I've been asked to do a few minutes on the work we're doing with sort of the whole institutional approach to digital literacy. I'm Neil Witt. I have this odd title of Head of Academic Support, Technology and Innovation. I'm not going to explain what that is now. Hopefully I shall get round to that in a few slides' time. I'm not going to give too much information about what our project is because I just want to focus on some of the change aspects. As a project, we were doing activity in digital literacy before the start of this program of work, and we've got a lot of information from our staff and students on their hopes, fears, uses, aspirations, where we wanted to go in terms of the use of technology, embedding technology into teaching and learning, using technology to support the university and so on. And as a project, we aimed to, at the end of the project, to be able to make some recommendations to the university about things like infrastructure, support and curriculum design. What's actually happened throughout the life cycle of this project is that we've been given a number of opportunities. So instead of just making recommendations, we've been given the opportunity across the institution to actually make some changes. And it's these opportunities that I'm just going to cover very, very briefly and talk about some of our experiences. And I have to say, without having the involvement or being involved in the entire program, I don't think we've actually been able to make the current impact and the future impact that we're working with the project. So a couple of years ago, 18 months ago, we were in an interesting situation. We had some data. We were baselining the university. We know that our students have technology. They want to use technology. We saw a change of the funding patterns, which, looking from the data that's come out from the budget yesterday, is actually going to get even worse. So we're looking at different needs and expectations from our students that we were a few years ago. And in the rise of technology and technology ownership, we're finding that students are expecting to use their own technologies in support of their own learning. And there's an assumption that academic staff are going to be able to support students in the use of technology. And that started raising some interesting questions in the university on how we're actually going to address these issues. So a number of things that we were considering as part of the project is how do we actually deal with this expectation issues from our students and from our staff, how do we meet the digital needs, and how do we actually change the way that we work to engage and support all staff. When I say all staff, that's not just the academic community, that's our professional support staff right across the university. And it's really interesting with Janet mentioning sustainability in her presentation. It's about how do we actually take these ideas and embed them into practice. Unlike many of you who've been involved in running projects for a number of years, and you end up, developing some really good resources. And if you're not careful, they get, if you take them to a university committee, someone says that's very, very nice, and they never get seen again. And so we're actually quite determined to make sure that the work that we're doing in this project and other projects actually is sustainable and is embedded into practice across the university. So this is where it really comes down for us, down to some quite interesting opportunities that arose throughout the life cycle of this project. We were doing a lot of work, obviously, to do with sort of benchmarking and looking at needs within the institution, and we were given as a project given an opportunity to make quite a larger input into a new university digital strategy about 12 months ago. And that covers 4 main areas. I'm not going to go into any details about the last 2 because that's to do with infrastructure and services. But what we actually highlighted in this strategy, the need to focus around digital people. And that's primarily our students, our professional support staff and our academic staff. And at the same time, we declared that we were going to make some major investment into the use of technology for teaching, learning, and research. But of course, developing a strategy is all very well, but you actually have to come up with ways and means to actually implement and operationalize that strategy. So we came along with, what came along was our second opportunity. The university has moved away from the traditional annual appraisal system and has an ongoing performance development review and performance development framework. And we saw this as an opportunity to actually tie things up, as where development needs are being identified in schools, faculties, programs, and within individuals. Working with colleagues in HR, we can actually start coordinating those needs and make sure that we have a range of support and training activities and materials in place, and we can actually use the needs of our staff to actually define future training and development programs. And that was pretty much a first for us, because trying to engage with HR has always been quite difficult. We have very good relationships there. We're now in a process in the next few months where we'll be going through and putting together those development requests based around digital literacy and digital skills, and feeding those back into our offering of support right across the university. And the third opportunity that we had, which isn't the most pleasant of ones, is that like many universities, we've been through a restructuring. And I was given an opportunity to actually put down on paper what I thought was going to be the solution for really getting our digital strategy into practice, and to provide a whole load of issues, or address a whole load of issues around digital literacy and digital skills. And one of our recommendations for that was we actually pulled together the key players and expertise across the university into one area, which is hence the longly titled Academic Support, Technology and Innovation, which brings together our learning technologists, our information specialists from the library, and our colleagues from digital skills development, who were the IT trainers, into a new group, so we can actually share expertise and skills and become a single point of entry for all things digital across the university. And what's actually happening from that is that we have a number of the key pieces in place, and like many institutions, we're developing another strategy. We have quite a wide-reaching 2020 strategy and a new series of business plans being associated around that strategy. And again, from what started off as a recommendation from the project, using both our findings and those from the Jisc's curriculum design program, I said, well, actually, I want to really embed this into the curriculum. And as of last week, we just got the go-ahead from our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic to reprofile our entire curriculum design process to make sure we can include the relevant aspects of digital literacy right across our process. So rather than looking at it just as curriculum delivery, we're actually looking at it in the entire design process. So I'll finish on my last slide now, which is really sort of the lessons that we've learned and the approach that we've taken. I'm not saying that everybody can do this, but there may be something that you can take away from it, which the first important part of it is to benchmark and gather our evidence, know how we can actually produce cohesive arguments, base it on data, work with staff and students to find out what the needs are. My approach is to take every available opportunity. Whether we see a gap, we can actually get the digital skills, digital literacy message out there, we'll take it. Is to work with the strategy, working with our Pro Vice Chancellor, our Office of the Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellors, heads of service, is to actually make sure that we don't just have these ambitions, that we can actually put them into practice. Staff development embedding is absolutely vital. This is a long-term process. This will be a cultural change over time, and probably the most sort of time-intensive aspect of this is actually looking at embedding right across the institution into a variety of processes. The most important one for us is curriculum design. And on that note, I will finish.
Thank you very much, Neil. That's a lot of stuff and beautifully squeezed into 7 or 8 minutes. I just want to pick up on a question and comment there from Andy Wilson from SDF. As he's saying that these are significant institution level changes. Well done. What drove them and made them accepted, do you think?
Having the evidence is really, really important. To be able to go to your senior leadership team with evidence about your staff and your students and link it to the national picture is absolutely vital. And again, we were very fortunate. We had a A Deputy Vice-Chancellor who's now left us, Bill Rammell, who's now got his own university, was very, very supportive. He got it straight away. Working with a Pro Vice-Chancellor Teaching Learning and our sort of quality unit and our Associate Deans Teaching and Learning, it's really getting those guys on board. So we can actually, I'm not saying you've got to do a top-down approach, but it's a top-down approach and it's a bottom-up approach. It's actually communicating what you want to do and using, the mechanisms of change that are already going on in the university. But having that top-level institutional support is absolutely vital. And with most sort of projects, when you apply for funding, you have to get a letter of support from a senior manager in the university. And we actually held ours to account because the university signed up for this when they said they'd support the project. And I have a legal document that says the university will actually get involved and do things. So we're meeting the conditions of all our funding and reminding people of those requirements as well.
Thanks, that's brilliant. I also want to squeeze in Rona's question because it's the same question as I have, which is, could you say a bit more about how this all links with the PDRs, the annual appraisals or development reviews of staff, and how that's worked and how it's played out on the ground with staff?
Yeah, I mean the PDR process is also links into a number of other approaches as well. The PDR is but the personal planning. We've recently, over the last 18 months, introduced school plans as well. So this is sort of rapid response to feedback issues, changes in policy and so on. And using both the PDR and the school plans to identify the digital skills, digital development needs for our staff, and at the same time we do it from the curriculum. But we also now sort of triangulating that from as many sources as possible. So also feeding our external examiners report back into the needs when it comes to the support requirements. But the most important thing with the PDR is if an individual or group of individuals identify a need, is to be able to put that in place and address that need and feed that back into the system so they're aware that, yeah, as part of the PDR process to identify these requirements, we've actually done that, and getting people to actually engage within the whole process. The PDR is really new to the university. We're moving away from the old appraisal culture, and because with the PDR it's not just a one-off, once a year event, it's a follow-up event throughout the year and sort of leadership one-to-ones as well. But the thing about the PDR is it's there to align individuals and all parts of the institution to the institutional strategy. So I mean, we're just one part of it, but for us it was quite exciting to actually get involved with HR and actually have try and tie things up right across the institution.
Thanks, Neil, that's really useful. Right then, it's time to move on to sort of general discussion and questions for any of the projects. So do please put anything in the chat box, or indeed if you've got a mic set up, then do raise your hand and we'll call you in to ask a question. If I may, I'd just like to kick it off by asking actually any of the presenters who feel like answering to comment about whether these approaches you discuss are ones that bring everyone along, all staff groups, or do they mainly appeal to those who are already sold on digital literacies or technology enhanced learning? How do you reach the less easily reachable?
One of the things that we've been quite pleasantly surprised about is how well all the groups that we've been talking to, which includes academics, it includes librarians, careers, employability, information services and so on, how much they get that framework. So well done Rona and Helen for putting that together. They really get it. It makes sense to them in a way that they understand in their own context. And so that has been a real help. That once we start talking about it in those terms and in terms of the things that are important to them, then they do get it. So it's not bringing, it's not bringing everybody along, because you'll never bring everybody along, but it's certainly not just the converted in that case.
I think for us, it was the project at the moment reaches probably more those who are already converted, if you like. Although we've had a couple of cases where people have been signed up by their line manager rather reluctantly. But our aim really is that through the teaching administrators that we can provide support to academics in the department and then really provide effective support to those academics who might be reluctant, because if things are set up in such a way that they find it doesn't impinge too much on their time and it does actually provide benefits for the way that they teach, then we can do that through teaching administrators, and once academics are happy with a particular aspect, they often pick up the ball and run with it.
Right, thank you very much, Stephanie. There's a question here from Ian saying, any advice on getting academic staff buy-in to digital literacies? I think that's a key one that a lot of people are concerned about.
I put a little response to that in the chat box, but basically, I mean, our approach has really been to start a conversation about what matters to them. So, what's the most important thing to them? So, in our case, for a lot of staff, it's research and ref. You know, they're fundamentally interested in that. They're not. Everything else is a bit of a distraction from that, particularly at the moment. And so, what we've done is focus on, you know, well, how can developing your digital literacies really help you to improve your research profile, for instance, and we've done a lot of work in that in some schools. So that would be our top tip for that, is to really start with what's important to them rather than digital literacy.
Thanks, Janet. Neil, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, one of the approaches that that we know that we've taken, if you start trying to put sessions on to, you know, talking about digital literacy, it's not the most engaging term that's out there. We had a sort of a number of things happen in the university where various heads of school decided en masse to buy their staff iPads, which resulted in a whole load of inquiries coming in going, I've got this iPad, what do I do with it? Where's the university desktop? How do I buy apps? And so on. We set up a session on which we just, you know, called Talking About iPads. We were oversubscribed. I think we've run that 11 times now. And to be honest, it's not about talking about iPads, it's talking about digital literacy. But from academic staff, and we actually get, it's not just academic staff, it's professional support staff as well. We get a lot of interest in those sessions because the iPad is seen as the hook in there, and it's something tangible. People actually know what the iPad is. But once you actually start unpacking it, it's all about digital literacy and digital literacy skills. And it's some of the best sessions that we've run, purely because we've got staff right across the university at all levels, in all schools, in all departments, coming together, talking and sharing experiences. And getting those groups of staff together to share their experiences is probably one of the sort of best learning interventions we've come across with so far.
Thanks, Neil. And I know you've written that up, haven't you, as a session recipe? Because I was sharing it last week in an event in Exeter, and there were some people who were very keen to take it up and try that approach in their context.
Yeah, quite happy to share that. We've also run the session with colleagues in other institutions as well. You know, again, actually using the Collaborate platform. I mean, if anybody's interested, I'm quite happy to run another online session or a couple in the future.
Thanks very much. And there's a couple of requests there for the link in the chat window, if you could. I think, Neil, you already touched on it, but I was wondering if anyone else had any views on how to get senior management to understand the issue of digital literacies and the need for them, and to get engaged with pushing things forward.
It's Joe here in Cardiff. One of the things that we find that could be useful to get senior management on board is obviously aligning with their agenda. And we've got some key initiatives here, well, everybody has, in terms of things like the research data management initiative, which I think is a very good opportunity for looking at targeting the development of digital literacies for researchers. And that provides a context in which to have the conversation and illustrate the relevance and value of developing these skills. So clearly, those are the sorts of things to kind of align ourselves with.
I think that's something we've seen across the project actually, is linking digital literacies or whatever you're calling it in your context with another institutional goal or aspiration or strategy or something that is actually pushing hard, something that the institution is really going for, and showing how that links with digital literacies is a real way in.
Just to follow on with that as well, we've had some really good success aligning ourselves with things like the careers and employability work. They've been very receptive because they've seen that digital literacy is a key aspect of that, and they're a good intermediary between. We're based in professional services, but they get more direct access to academics and students, and that's going to be really fruitful in the future because they're very enthusiastic. And some of the other things that we've been challenged with is, well, we've got a number of people around the institution that have kind of separate agendas. So whether it's an explicit skills agenda, careers, information digital literacy, enterprise, entrepreneurship, and what we're all trying to do is find a way of actually bringing that together in a way that we can embed it into the curriculum. So there's clear opportunities to actually join forces and think cleverly about how we can bring the meld across those sorts of things, rather than actually each of us driving our own agenda.
Thanks very much, Joe. Actually, with an eye on the time, we're better start bringing this to a close, really. I just wanted to mention that many of you may be interested in our next session, which is on the 17th of April, about implementing the UK Professional Standards Framework in the Digital University. I know we've had a lot of sign-ups for that already, but I think there are still spaces. Marianne will tell me if there aren't. And to say thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone who's participated today. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you for all your questions. There's been lots going on in the chat box. And we will make the recording of this available as soon as we can. So if you need to go back and look over everything, you can, or share it with colleagues. So thank you very, very much to everyone.